The damp chill of the tower stone was a familiar ache now, but it was the silence that truly pressed in. Not the silence of solitude, but the silence that followed the whispers. Anne Boleyn, queen, no longer huddled deeper into the thin blanket, her eyes wide and fixed on a point on the wall that wasn't there. It had been 12 days. 12 days since the world had tilted on its axis, since the barge had carried her. Here, stripping away title, dignity, and hope with every ripple of the Thames. But the true breaking hadn't happened on the river. It hadn't happened in the courtroom, nor under the cold, accusing gaze of her judges. It had happened in a room not mentioned in any official record, during hours that seemed to stretch beyond the confines of the sun's rise and fall. They hadn't used racks or thumbscrews. The methods were far more insidious, a slow dismantling of the mind and spirit. They spoke not just of adultery or treason, but of things that gnawed at the edges of sanity. Twisting her own memories, her own beliefs, against her. They showed her ... things, whispered possibilities that were more monstrous than any fabricated charge. They didn't just want her confession. They wanted her essence, the intellect, the sheer force of will that had defied convention, and they wanted to extinguish it, not just for Henry, but for reasons that felt ancient and cold, tied to powers and fears that had nothing to do with succession or statecraft. She remembered the taste of fear, yes, but also the sickening sweetness of forced compliance, the way her own voice had sounded alien saying words that weren't hers. Acknowledging truths that felt like poison in her veins, they hadn't just broken her will, they had subtly, expertly rearranged her reality. They had shown her a reflection of herself that was so distorted, so terrifying, that the prospect of the axe felt like a release from the true horror. This was the secret of the hidden 17 days. Not just the political machinations, not just the swift, brutal justice, but the deliberate, calculated process of breaking a woman from the inside out. What was done in those unrecorded hours, in that unnamed room, was a violation far deeper than any public accusation. It was the theft of her truth, replaced by a narrative etched onto her soul with chilling precision. And as the final dawn approached, illuminating the cold stone of her cell, Anne Boleyn was not just a queen facing execution. She was a woman, carrying a silence heavier than any crown. A silence that hinted at a darkness in the heart of power, a truth about how inconvenient spirits are truly extinguished. Buried not just beneath the Tower Green, but beneath centuries of carefully constructed history. The story of her fall was a tragedy. The story of those 17 days was a horror, and only the stones remembered the silence. A shroud woven from fear and forgetting clung to the tower stones like river mist. It was a silence not of absence, but of deliberate suppression, a heavy blanket thrown over inconvenient truths. Centuries later, the air within the archive, thick with the scent of decaying paper and dust motes, dancing in the single shaft of sunlight, felt equally weighted. Here, among the brittle leaves of history, Dr. Alistair Finch, a man whose life was spent deciphering the whispers of the past, felt the pressure of that silence most acutely. He wasn't specifically seeking the ghost of the woman who had worn a crown and then faced the axe. His research concerned the mundane logistics of the Tower garrison in the 1530s, yet the sheer volume of records from those 17 days in May 1536 was itself a clue, a frantic, almost obsessive documentation of the trivial, something significant beneath a mountain of the mundane. One particular document snagged his attention, a constable's log, meticulously kept, detailing every soul who passed through the Tower gates. Most entries were routine, supply carts, messengers, guards on patrol, but several days into the Queen's imprisonment, an entry stood out, penned in a hand different from the usual scribe, slightly smudged, as if written in haste or poor light. Asterisk, May 7th, midnight. Asterisk, asterisk, received visitor, per King's command. Designation, Night Owl, admitted to Queen's apartments via privy stair. Duration, until the hour before dawn. Asterisk Night Owl, not a name, but a code name or a description. Admitted via a privy stair, a secret, rarely used passage. And at midnight, 4 hours, the official narrative spoke of the Queen's isolation, her limited contact with the outside world, her interrogations conducted by known figures like Cromwell and Kingston. Who was this Night Owl? What business could be so secret it required a clandestine midnight meeting with a woman accused of the highest treason? A woman supposedly cut off from all influence? From the period, he found a fragmented letter from a foreign ambassador's agent, intercepted and copied before being sent. The agent, reporting on court gossip and events, mentioned the sudden, unexplained disappearance of a specific lady-in-waiting, a woman known for her fierce loyalty and discretion, just days before the Queen's arrest. Vanished, the agent wrote, as if swallowed by the stone walls themselves. No word of dismissal, no trace, to unsettling details, seemingly unconnected. A secret visitor in the dead of night, a loyal servant erased from existence. The official charges against the Queen were public, the witnesses named, the trial a grim spectacle. But these fragments hinted at a shadow play occurring concurrently, a hidden agenda unfolding behind the thick walls. Away from prying eyes and official records, what transpired during those midnight hours? Was it coercion? A desperate attempt to extract a confession? Or something else entirely? A negotiation? A threat? A final, chilling message delivered not by a minister of state, but by an anonymous night owl? And what of the vanished servant? Was she a witness removed? A confidant silenced permanently? The silence in the archives seemed to deepen, no longer just the quiet of disuse, but the oppressive weight of secrets deliberately buried. Of the tower remembered, perhaps, but their memory was fragmented, scattered across altered logs and vanished lives. The horror wasn't just the public spectacle of the scaffold. It was the unseen, unheard acts committed in the dark, the true nature of the power that could make inconvenient spirits not just fall, but utterly disappear, leaving only cryptic clues for those with the patience and perhaps the foolishness to look. The mystery wasn't solved. It had only just begun to reveal its true, terrifying shape. The air in the archive was thick with the dust of centuries and the chill of forgotten lives. Elias Thorne, a man whose profession was the meticulous cataloging of the past, felt the weight of it pressing down on him. He wasn't looking for grand pronouncements or royal decrees today. His search was far more granular, far more unsettling. He was tracing the faint, almost invisible threads connecting those who had simply ceased to be. His fingers, stained with ink and age, traced a line in a brittle ledger detailing the reassignment of a minor official. A man named Alaric Finch, who had voiced inconvenient questions about certain state expenditures. The entry was brief, unremarkable, save for a small, almost imperceptible symbol scribbled in the margin next to Finch's name. It wasn't an official seal, nor a clerk's shorthand. It was a jagged, three-pronged mark, like a broken twig or a claw print. Elias felt a prickle of unease. He had seen that mark before, not in the official records of the condemned. Those were public, brutal, and final. No, he had seen it in the files of others who had vanished. A merchant who questioned new trade, tariffs, a scholar who published a treatise deemed unpatriotic, even a seamstress whose husband was overheard speaking carelessly in a tavern. All gone, all with that same unsettling mark beside their names, in some obscure document, a tax record, a census entry, a guild register. The official accounts offered bland, contradictory narratives. Relocated for health, emigrated suddenly, fate unknown, delivered with a shrug. But the pattern, once noticed, was chillingly consistent. These weren't just dissidents. They were individuals whose removal served a purpose beyond silencing dissent. They were being erased, their very existence scrubbed from the public eye, leaving behind only these faint, almost accidental breadcrumbs. Seeking a different kind of clue, Elias ventured into the city's underbelly, where whispers carried more truth than official pronouncements. He found an old woman, a former laundress for the official residence where Alaric Finch had last been seen alive. Her eyes darted nervously, her voice a raspy murmur. He left? Yes, she coughed, pulling her shawl tighter despite the stuffy air of the tavern's back room. In the dead of night, not through the front gate, mind you, there was a carriage, dark as pitch, no crest, and men, ... not guards. They wore no colors, just dark cloth. They didn't drag him, no, he walked, but his eyes, ... empty, like he wasn't there at all. But then came the conflicting detail, delivered with a shudder. A week later, I saw him again, or ... someone like him, down by the docks. He was loading crates onto a ship bound for the northern wastes. But he was thin, ragged, and he moved like a puppet, and he didn't look at me, not even when I called his name softly. Just kept working. It wasn't him, not really, but it was. Elias left the tavern with a knot of dread tightening in his gut. A silent departure in an unmarked carriage, followed by a spectral reappearance weeks later, performing manual labor. Hundreds of miles away, it defied logic, defied the known methods of state control. Later that week, investigating the abandoned workshop of the vanished scholar, Elias found another clue. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard wasn't a hidden manuscript or incriminating letter, but a small, intricately carved object. It was a piece of bone, smooth and pale, shaped into a complex, non-geometric form that seemed both alien and disturbingly familiar. It wasn't human bone, of that he was certain, but the craftsmanship was exquisite, precise, and etched into its surface, almost too fine to see, was the jagged, three-pronged symbol. He held the bone shard, feeling a coldness that had nothing to do with the damp workshop air. This wasn't just about silencing voices or removing obstacles. The symbol, the empty eyes, the impossible reappearance, the strange artifact, they hinted at something far older, far more profound, and infinitely more terrifying than political purges. They suggested a power that didn't merely kill or imprison, but altered, consumed, or perhaps even repurposed those it targeted. The scaffold was a lie. The true horror lay in the unseen mechanism that could make a man disappear, leaving behind only a cryptic mark and a piece of bone, and perhaps a hollow echo of himself loading crates on a distant dock. The mystery hadn't just deepened. It had transformed into a nightmare, and Elias, holding the cold bone shard, knew he was now standing on its threshold. The cold weight of the bone shard in Elias's palm was a physical anchor to the abyss that had just opened beneath his feet. It wasn't just a bone. It was small, curved, unmistakably a phalanx, a finger bone, and it was unnervingly clean, devoid of flesh or gristle, as if it had been meticulously prepared or perhaps extracted. He looked at the spot where the condemned man, supposedly hanged moments before, had simply ceased to be. The air still felt charged, but not with the lingering energy of a public spectacle. It was a dead, hollow space, like a vacuum had momentarily existed. And there, etched into the damp cobblestone, near where the man's feet should have dangled, was the mark. Elias had seen it before, whispered about in hushed tones, a tight, intricate whirl of lines, like a brand, but somehow in the stone, not just on it. It wasn't paint, wasn't scratched. It looked ... absorbed the official story. Already being disseminated by town criers with forced cheer was that the execution had gone off without a hitch. Justice served. But Elias knew the truth, a truth shared only by the few who had been close enough, observant enough, and now terrified enough to question their own sanity. The scaffold was a stage, the noose a prop. The real act happened in the blink of an eye, silent and absolute. New, unsettling details began to surface in Elias's mind. Fragments of overheard conversations and unsettling observations that he'd previously dismissed as morbid gossip or coincidence. The condemned weren't the only ones vanishing. Old Man Hemlock, the reclusive clockmaker, had disappeared from his locked workshop last week, leaving behind only a faint smell of ozone and a single clean finger bone on his workbench. Beside a freshly etched whorl mark on a brass plate, a young woman, accused of petty theft and held in the city jail, had vanished from her cell overnight, the heavy door still bolted from the outside. The same mark burned into the stone floor, a bone shard tucked neatly into her straw mattress. The pattern was sickeningly clear now. The scaffold victims were just the public face of the disappearances. A macabre theater masking a far more pervasive horror. Anyone could be taken. The mark and the bone were the only calling cards left by this unseen mechanism. Conflicting accounts swirled in the fearful whispers of the city. Some said the mark glowed faintly in the dark. Others claimed the bone shards were warm to the touch, pulsing with a faint energy. Elias's shard was cold, dead. Was that significant? Did it mean the process was complete? Or was his bone different? And the destination, loading crates on a distant dock, was that literal, or a metaphor for a fate worse than death. Elias remembered the rumors about the Blackwood docks, the furthest, most isolated section of the harbor, where ships arrived and departed under cover of darkness, carrying unmarked cargo, crewed by silent, gaunt figures. Sailors spoke of strange lights there at night, of a pervasive low hum that vibrated in your teeth. Could that be the source, or merely another symptom? Holding the bone, feeling its unnatural smoothness, Elias knew he couldn't turn back. The scaffold's lie was a curtain pulled back on an abyss. The bone shard was a key, or perhaps a breadcrumb, leading deeper into the nightmare. The mystery hadn't just transformed, it had become a living, breathing entity, and Elias, with the cold bone pressing into his skin, had just stepped across its threshold. He had to find out where the trail of bones and marks led. The archives are now sealed. The full truth may never be known, leaving only whispers and shadows in the pages of history. Some stories are best left buried,